All right, everybody. We are kicking off our next unit. And today we're going to talk about the Phoenicians, background of the Phoenicians, and also something they're famous for, and that's their trade. So the Phoenicians lived in the area between Mesopotamia and Egypt, an area that is today the countries of Syria and Lebanon. So first, let's talk about where that is. So here's our I somehow ended up focused on the Mediterranean Sea. Here's our, area of study, the Middle East, and there it is. It's like, what's happening here? So let me just zoom out a little bit so we can get a wider view. There we go. All right, so as we know, Mesopotamia is in what is today Iraq. Egypt, we definitely know where Egypt is. And the Phoenicians lived in what is today this part of Syria on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and the country of Lebanon. And if we zoom in, it'll give you a better idea. So this coastal area here, this piece of Syria, and then all of Lebanon is where the Phoenicians lived. Now, to give you a little sense, here's a map of them, and you could see they live in a very narrow strip of land. So you have the Mediterranean on one side, and then these green little trees here, these are forests filled with cedar trees, and we're going to talk more about that in a bit. So the ancient name for the area between Mesopotamia and Egypt, if you include Israel, it was called Canaan. So in ancient times, the lands of the Phoenicians and the Hebrews were known as Canaan. So originally, before there were Phoenicians and Hebrews, there were two groups. The Philistines, they eventually become the Phoenicians, and then the Canaanites eventually become the Hebrews. The Hebrews we're going to talk about in a different notes video. As you can see, the P&H stands for Phoenicians and Hebrews. That's this unit. So let's get into the Phoenicians. So they lived in the northern part of this ancient land of Canaan, as I mentioned. And most of what we know about the Phoenicians comes from the Bible. In this unit of the Phoenicians and Hebrews, there's going to be some things that we study that some of you might know from certain, religious studies and things like that. It's not just the Bible that we know about the Phoenicians. It's also writings of other civilizations like the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians and the Romans, and also some archaeological discoveries of their cities and ships. So the Phoenicians are huge traders. And I don't mean backstabbers, I mean people who trade things. And by the year 1200 BCE, Phoenicians settled in that narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea. So here's the forest, here's the mountains, there's the sea, here's the Phoenicians in this narrow strip of land. Okay. There wasn't enough land to grow food for everyone. So here's the problem. So you have this narrow strip of land. You can't grow food on the beach because certain things don't grow in sand. You can't grow food in the forest because the crops don't get enough sunlight. You can't grow food in the mountains. Well, the rocky terrain of the mountains because it's difficult to dig. So the Phoenicians don't have a lot of area to farm, which is why they turn to trade to make a living, because their neighbors have lots of areas to farm. So they're going to have big trade deals with Egypt, with Mesopotamia, for food, because they don't have a lot of places to grow it themselves. So, as I mentioned, the Phoenicians have to turn to the sea to make a living. So, here's the ancient land of Phoenicians. So, they're going to have to use the Mediterranean Sea to travel to different places to trade. So, the mountains near the Phoenician lands are filled with cedar trees because step one, if you want to rely on the sea to make a living, you're going to need boats. And if you're going to build boats, you're going to need trees. So good thing the Phoenicians had lots of cedar trees. And in fact, let me just get this up. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Let's see. Let's see if it still comes up. The flag of the country of Lebanon, obviously I spelled it wrong, but Google's smart enough, right? We think? Yes, it is. So even the flag today of the country of Lebanon has a cedar tree on it, just to show you how important cedar trees were the history to this land. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, the trees provide wood so that the Phoenicians could make their ships strong, and they could also make them fast. And to start off, they traded along the coast. So they were trading along the coastline of their main area. Then, as time goes on, they travel all over the world. And I don't just mean the ancient world. I mean the entire world. So, well, let me before I show you the products, let's get into that. So, I need to zoom out to do this. So here's the Phoenicians, right? They trade all over the Mediterranean Sea. As time goes on, and the Greeks develop and the Romans develop, there's trading with them. They also trade all along the coast of Africa with different civilizations. There is even evidence, and I'm going to talk more about this a little later, that 2,000 years before Columbus, the Phoenicians hit North America. Yep. Columbus is not the first to, I'm doing air quotes. I know you can't see me, but pretend you see me doing air quotes. Columbus is not the first to, air quotes, discover America. First of all, the Vikings came to America way before Columbus, but way before the Vikings, the Phoenicians also made it to America. So there's that. All right, so in terms of popular items they traded. So they traded their cedar wood because certain places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, they only really have palm trees that grow in the desert. So the Phoenicians have lots of cedar wood. They have cloth, and you're going to learn more about cloth in a second. They have glass. The Phoenicians figure out how to make glass. And if you know anything about making glass, you know one of the main ingredients is sand. And they also have some cool perfume because nobody wants to smell, even in ancient times. So in return, they're getting gold. And when Egypt is trading them gold, they're getting it from Nubia. And the Phoenicians trade with other civilizations in Africa to get that gold. Other metals, things like copper and bronze, which the Mesopotamians have. And then, of course, the Phoenicians need food. So it's one of those deals that kind of works out for everyone. And here's another thing the Phoenicians did. So their ships were traveling workshops so that the ancient people could request customized items. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say a Phoenician merchant ship comes to your city-state in ancient times. This is a big day. And they say, all right, we're going to be here a week. Come get, we have little trinkets, we have little things. We have perfume, we have cloth, whatever you need for that. Let's say you wanted a certain thing a certain way. Instead of the Phoenicians saying to you oh, sorry, I don't have my tools to make that, you're going to have to wait 6 months till I come back. So what the Phoenicians did by having workshops on their ships, they would say, okay, after, I close up shop for tonight, I'm going to make your customized thing, come back tomorrow and we'll trade for it. So that was pretty smart of the Phoenicians, and it definitely helped their business. Now, it also helps that they didn't have to have strictly sailors to sail the ships and strictly artisans to make the things. The sailors are the artisans, so they can do both. Now, the Phoenician sailors figured out where they were going by studying the sun and the stars. Certain things like we've talked about, like the sun sets in the west. So things to the west are that direction, and it rises in the east. So that's that direction east. In terms of north or south, some of you heard about things like the North Star and all that kind of stuff. Now, the Phoenicians are a little sneaky with their trade routes, but it's like a stealthy, maybe cunning type of sneaky. And let me explain what I mean. So, the Phoenicians wanted to protect their trade routes. They didn't want people they didn't want the Egyptians to be like, oh, the Phoenicians have all this stuff from like the coast of Africa. I don't need to get it from the Phoenicians. Let me get it myself, and be competition for the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians protected their trade routes with hyperbole. That's exaggeration. I dropped a language arts word on you. That means exaggeration. And also fear tactics. And let me tell you what I mean. Let's say you went to Egypt, if you were a Phoenician, and an Egyptian was like, oh, where did you get this from? It's like, can I go there? I'm a merchant too. Let me go there as well. The Phoenicians would be like, you don't want to go there. There are horrible sea monsters. And remember Bob? And the Egyptian would be like, who's Bob? And the Phoenicians would be like, Bob was here the last time with me. He died. A sea monster ate him. And the Egyptians would be like, okay, stupid Phoenicians, you go risk your life for our stuff. We're not going to do it. Meanwhile, there was no Bob. The Phoenicians totally made that up to protect their trade routes and to make sure that the Egyptians would never or the Mesopotamians or any other group or the Greeks would never follow them. They always sailed off site of the coast so that if you were on the coast, you wouldn't be able to see their ships. So the Phoenicians did that to kind of protect their trade routes with things. Now, the question then remains, did the Phoenicians know they were making up stories? Or did they think, how there's storms, obviously? Did they think like these big storms, and if you're out in the water in these big storms, the waves can kind of look like a sea monster, and maybe one of these big storms did cause Bob to go overboard, and they thought it was the sea monster attacking. So that historians aren't clear. Did the Phoenicians really believe there were sea monsters? Or did they know there weren't sea monsters? That we don't know. That's kind of up in the air. All right. So they traveled to parts of the world no one else did. So they got products from regions that nobody else had, as we mentioned. They sailed along the coast of Africa, and they also made it all the way to India. So let's move my map a little bit so we can see this. So here's where the Phoenicians are starting from. They sail around the coast of Africa to trade for things, and then they even go all the way to India to trade for things. Now, some of you might be thinking, bruh, why did they go that whole long way there? All right, for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, you're the Phoenicians. You'd have to cross a mountain to go all the way over here. And then you're like walking with your stuff just to get to the Persian Gulf so you can get to India. It's not going to work. And if you're like, well, why don't they just go all the way here and make it to the Red Sea? There's a desert here. So it's all about sailing using the Mediterranean Sea. Now, today, in today's world, there's actually a canal here called the Suez Canal. So today, if you were in Lebanon and you wanted to go to India on a boat, you would go through the Suez Canal, down the Red Sea, and then make it all the way to India. However, that canal was not built till like the 1960s. So not any time in ancient history. So that caused them to go this way. And also, they're on their trip to India, they're trading and getting stuff and trading stuff all along this coast of Africa, all the way around. And then when they're in India, they're getting stuff. And then what they would do is they would go this way, right? Go over here. Then they'd be over here with Egypt, and then they're sailing down the Nile, and then there you go. So, yeah, it works out. Okay. Let me keep going. My notes My notes don't like when I click from one thing to another. Oh, it just went down way too much. Well, we'll keep this and I'll explain this. We'll keep this and I'll explain this. All right, so I already talked about this a little bit. There is evidence that the Phoenicians sailed west to North America 2,000 years before Columbus. And here's how they discovered this evidence. So they found some Phoenician artifacts dating back to ancient history in North America. So then that led to historians and archaeologists to be like, how the heck did Phoenician stuff make it to North America? And they were like, well, they had a boat. Could they have sailed all the way over here? And then the discussion was like, was a Phoenician boat strong enough to do it? So this is very recent. In 2018, historians and archaeologists made a boat exactly like the ancient Phoenicians would have done it, using the materials like replica, all that kind of stuff. And they said, let's first see if a Phoenician boat could sail around the coast of Africa. So 2018, they sailed around the coast of Africa. Success. Then in 2019, they were like, all right, we're going to see if it can make it to North America. So they sailed in 2019 and made it all the way to the Dominican Republic, which is obviously, where Christopher Columbus made it to. So, ta-da, there is proof then a Phoenician ship could have made it all the way to North America. Therefore, that's why there's Phoenician artifacts. Now, some historians are like, we need more evidence to say that's completely true, but it's pretty much true. So, because the Phoenicians are so focused on their business, they don't have time really for like armies and things. So they want peace with their neighbors, because this was a fear, right? I'm going to use Egypt again. So the fear is this. Egypt is pretty strong with their army and things like that. Who's to stop Egypt from being like, you know what, Phoenicians, I'm just going to take over your land and your ships will belong to me and take that. So the Phoenicians say this. They were like, you know what? We're going to make peace treaties, which is obviously agreements of peace between places. And as part of the peace treaties, kings of like Mesopotamia, pharaohs of Egypt, they get all the free stuff they could ever want. And it's kind of a bribe, definitely kind of a bribe. But the Egyptians and Mesopotamians are like, why would I attack the Phoenicians? They give me all the free stuff I ever want. And it's smart of the Phoenicians because let's just say a group of people wanted to attack the Phoenicians. The Egyptians and Mesopotamians would defend them because the Egyptians and Mesopotamians know that other group of people, they're not going to get the free stuff to Egypt and Mesopotamia. So the Phoenicians are kind of smart with that. Little politics for their land. So in exchange for these products, as I said, the kings agreed to leave the Phoenicians alone. So there you have it. That is Phoenician background and trade notes, part 1.